Hi, and welcome to the Next App DevCon podcast. I am Sriyank, Head of Developers Community for reactCon, a React Native event taking place at Next App DevCon Berlin. So, from October 7 to 9, this conference will witness world's largest gathering of mobile developers at one place. Here I am with Kadi Kraman, Program Committee member of reactCon. Kadi is a full-time React Native developer working at Expo. Kadi, hi, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Kadi, you have spent over 6 years building React Native applications, and now you are deep into the world of performance observability. So, when we talk about observability, like in React Native, not just monitoring or logging, so what does that actually mean, and why should developer actually care about it?
Yeah, so I think React Native developers have actually been quite, I'm going to say performance focused for in the recent years as well. So if you look at the results of the React Native developer survey, there's always people who are interested in, increasing FPS and
Mhm.
making sure that low-end Android devices work well and things like that. So we're pretty like performance conscious already.
Mhm.
And observability is in kind of the same sphere of things, but compared to like performance monitoring, which you do locally, but like while building, observability is monitoring the system after it's shipped, so after it's live. And it's different from analytics. So analytics is kind of user data, so understanding what users are doing, versus observability is understanding how your app is doing, so speed and performance of your app in the real world. And that's been something that's quite been historically quite difficult to gauge.
Mhm.
So in the recent times, that's what I've been looking into.
Yeah, you also mentioned that, like you are working on a new product, Observe, at Expo, that you and your team at Expo has been working on lately. So I'm just curious about this new product and what problem it is going to solve in the life of a typical React Native developer.
Yeah, so I mean, it is very new, like very in private preview at the moment.
Mhm.
But yeah, Observe is basically, well, it comes from a lot of discussions we have with our customers. So I'm in the developer success team at Expo, which means that we talk a lot to our customers, like from the free tier to enterprise tier and everyone in the middle. So we're seeing like what problems people have and being able to actually see what's happening with your app as it goes live is like is quite a black box still. I mean, did you ever have you ever done web development yourself? I know you're a mobile background.
Yeah, I have tried it in my high school, but after that, like I moved into Android, and I have always
Ah,
been
you
an
went
Android.
straight to the good stuff. Yeah, well, for React Native, obviously because it is like very similar to React and it's like React for native, a lot of React Native developers actually came from the web. So they're kind of like expecting the same kind of easy observability and metrics for React Native as they have on the web, and that's just not the case. So on the web, if you have like Google performance metrics, you can measure the performance tab. Like it's much easier to understand what's happening with your website when it's live. Whereas for native apps, it's like there's more going on, and it is more difficult to gauge than just looking at what your JavaScript is doing. So that's the problem we're solving. So we're trying to get customers and just users, like builders of apps, more information of what's actually happening with their app after they've pushed it to the stores.
Yeah, I also believe that, React Native applications have a complex startup sequence, such as native initialization, JavaScript bundle loading, bridge setup, and then first render. So, why are startup metrics like time to interactive or bundle load time so critical to track? And what's actually at stake if any developer ignores them?
Yeah, well, for React Native, I mean, for web apps especially, you have additional considerations for like when you're measuring when the user can actually interact with it. Because obviously you are opening the app and then, things are getting loaded, and then you get your splash screen, and then you get loading screen, and you're logged in, and then you can interact with it. But there are other things that can happen behind the scenes. So you could, for example, as a developer, choose to do some asynchronous data fetching or auth checking or syncing while your splash screen is open. Or if you do, let's say, over-the-air updates, you could choose to check for a new update, so the user is there waiting for longer and waiting for the splash screen to end. So that's why something like time to first render and time to interactive are really important to measure, because you are not seeing necessarily in development the impact of these additional checks that you're putting in.
Yeah, in fact, I feel many React Native teams try to track performance with general analytics tools or APM solutions built for the web. So, what's the most frustrating gap or misconception you see when developers try to monitor React Native startup performance using those tools?
I would say, well, with existing tools, pardon me, with existing tools that are focusing on JavaScript and React, they are obviously not going to be able to understand what's happening in the native side. So for a React Native app, there is an element where obviously the native app boots up, but then it has to load up the JavaScript bundle, the root bundle, and then the rest of the app loads. So there's an additional step that we want to track as well. And depending on how many libraries you have, obviously it's going to be a small amount of impact, but if you have a very large library that the app needs to load before it can actually load, then that's going to impact your load times.
So it sounds like there is this attribution problem. Something is wrong, but you cannot figure out what and where, right? So if a React Native developer wants to start tracking startup metrics properly, not just guessing or using development builds, so what's the first metric they should instrument, and how would they actually capture it in production? Can you throw some light on that?
Oh, as I've already mentioned, I think the time to interactive or time to first render are still the most important ones. So with the preview library that we're building with Observe, you do have to manually mark it. So you have to call mark interactive and mark first render. The reason for that is it is impossible to detect that automatically, because you might be doing extra things. You might be fetching your JavaScript bundle, or you might be doing some asynchronous auth checking, or you might be just showing an animation. I remember I worked on an app where we actually had a 7-second animation on a splash screen, which was a design choice, even though it is against many recommendations for guidelines. So even though that is a metric that you do need to specifically add to each screen yourself, that is going to give you a lot of ideas for how your users are actually experiencing the app when they load it for the first time. Especially if you're using ES Update or any other over-the-air update thing. But for ES Update, actually in SDK 55, we have shipped bundle diffing, so that when you publish an update, you don't have to download the whole update, you just download the diff, which is going to hugely impact the initial load time. So if you are, for example, applying an update behind your splash screen, which some people do, then you would expect to actually see the metrics go down, because the duration of the download would go down.
Yeah, well, Kadi, you have been on both sides, building React Native application for years, and now you're working on observability tooling known as Observe at Expo. So what surprised you most when you started looking at real production startup metrics that you did not see in development?
Well, one thing that actually surprised me, and it was just lack of knowledge, but I didn't realize, is that native operating systems, both iOS and Android, have a pre-warming functionality. So there's actually two types of app startup time: a warm startup time and a cold startup time. And this was really a surprise to me. I didn't realize that this was happening. And actually, especially for iOS, For example, it learns from your behavior. So let's say that you get up in the morning and at 8 o'clock in the morning you always open Instagram. Then iOS actually learns this pattern of behavior, and then it makes sure that Instagram is pre-warmed, so ready to launch before your usual 8 o'clock time, so that when you actually open it, it's going to be much faster. And I didn't know that this capability was out there, and that was really interesting to me.
So that real world gap is humbling. As a developers, we are designing for experiences that we are not actually seeing, right? So Kadi, very soon,
Yeah.
as a program committee member of reactCon, you will be reviewing CFPs from the community. Okay, so you have been working on a observability tool lately, but as a typical React Native developer, what type of CFPs you would like to see in those talks that can help other React Native developers gain knowledge at this ReactCon event?
Yeah. Well, obviously, at conferences, we want to hear about the new cool things that are happening in React Native. So, new tools and libraries and user experiences and like how people are building. Obviously, now we have AI, so the way we're building is like very different. So, these new ways of working is like, I think that's a huge takeaway because we are all learning. We are learning to adapt in this crazy world. So, we're kind of need to help each other a little bit. But other things that I personally like, the talks that I personally really like, is talks where you can tell that the person is super passionate about this topic. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a new library that you created yourself. It could just be like this aha moment at work that you got, and you were like, oh my gosh, I had no idea it worked like that. And then you can't wait to share it. So, for example, one of the talks that really stuck out to me recently was about text streaming in React Native. So you can't do it using the built-in fetch, but why and what's the alternative? It's a really simple premise, but the way that Delphine from the chat told that story was really compelling, and I still remember it. So like these kind of stories intermixed with kind of new tools and
Yeah.
what's new would be awesome.
Yeah, I also feel that, like whenever a speaker is on stage, he should be focusing more on the story behind his talk, what he's presenting, and what he has himself experienced. Because there are millions of articles out there which can teach you about this and that. But, like when you use any tool, how it behaves in the real production app and what's your experience about it, that really matters on stage.
Yeah,
So,
and the best talks are stories. So that's the difference between a presentation when you're just sharing your knowledge when you're like, oh, I went out to do this, this was my plan, and this is what I did, and here's the bullet list. That is not what engages people. What engages people is when they can put themselves in your spots and just imagine this story, this character learning something along the way, and then feel refreshed at the end. So these are the best talks.
yeah. So yes, Kati. So I think we had a deep, insightful conversation so far, and I think it's time to lighten our mood a little bit. It's time to move on to our next segment of this podcast, which is known as "Would You Rather Rapid Fire Round." Well, it's a fun
Okay.
segment designed for the podcast. So I will just give you some impossible choices to make without thinking too much. Just pick one, okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So, would you rather have perfect startup performance but unpredictable performance after the app loads, or slightly slower startup but stable performance throughout?
I'm gonna say stable throughout because there's only one thing to debug.
So, would you rather debug a performance issue with perfect production data that you cannot reproduce locally, or reproduce issues locally but have no idea how bad it could be in production?
Oh, reproduce locally. If you can't reproduce it, you have no chance. I want to have a chance.
Yeah. Would you rather spend a week optimizing JavaScript bundle size by 30% or spend that week improving native initialization time by 15%?
Oh, am I gonna succeed? If I'm gonna succeed, I'll go for the bundle size because that will blow people's minds.
Would you rather have AI automatically detect and fix performance regressions before release or have perfect visibility into every millisecond of startup time, but fix everything manually?
Oh, AI, please fix all my things.
Would you rather teach a junior developer performance optimization through live debugging sessions or through analyzing production performance data and metrics?
I'm gonna say live debugging sessions, definitely.
Would you rather have comprehensive performance test in CI or production monitoring with alerts?
Um, I think performance testing in CI for React Native, because like when you have production monitoring, there's not a ton you can do instantly a lot of cases. So yeah, performance testing.
Would you rather build a React Native application that only runs on iOS with perfect performance tooling or build a cross platform application with current observability limitations?
Is that a loaded question from an Android developer? Of course I'm going to support Android. I wouldn't dare not.
Yeah.
Is that the right answer?
Yeah, I hope so. So, yeah, I mean, Kadi, that was fun. And thank you, Kadi, for joining us in this podcast. And thank you, viewers, for watching this podcast till the end. If you are a React Native developer and want to share your experience on stage, please submit your CFP. The link to CFP is on our Next App DevCon website. So, see you all in Berlin and don't forget the dates. It's October 7 to 9. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And thanks, Kadi, for joining us in this podcast. Bye bye.
Thank you. See you in Berlin.